Okay, and here we are on Drunken Dialectics.
Drunken Dialectics.
That's it right there. Okay, I'm Brannan.
I'm Payne.
And I'm Devin.
And today we're going to... I think it'd be a good idea to kind of focus in on exactly what Devin's advocating for in more of like a real world way. Not like the first principle kind of stuff. I think we're fairly clear on that. But more like... I think my ideas are correct. No. Well, I do. But I think my ideas are more easily digested. You know, I think it's pretty... People kind of grow up knowing what most of my political ideal... Like, they've been around it at least. They understand. Yours is a little more rare to come across. So I think it'd be a good idea to really hone in on what you're going for. So we kind of talked about how we do this. And I think it would be to present your ideal society in terms of how it is structured. Like, we obviously can't be, like, utopian in the sense that, and all the people like it, you know what I mean? But, like, just more like the actual, like, framework of it.
Right.
Like, the actual,
Okay.
So, if you could just go ahead. Let's Drunken Dialectics, let's take our opening shot here.
I'll take it.
Oh, okay. Well, Devin's got it for you, so. Payne, give us some Payne thoughts.
Okay, some Payne thoughts over here.
See, you can't keep doing this. Because every time I throw it to you, you just repeat whatever I say and try to draw it out to where you don't actually have to say anything. The people want to hear Payne's voice. They want to know, what is Payne thinking? Therefore, I know what to think. that's
You're the voice of a generation,
you're the voice of every generation, combined into one. And therefore, the voice of no generation.
All right, this just in.
Whoa.
Right?
Buy some flip phones. Forget.
Oh yeah, he's on this thing.
Forget regular smartphones. Buy flip phones. Smartphones are distractions. Flip phones, you should downgrade to those for emergencies only.
He's serious about this, by the way.
I'm going to get a flip phone soon, and I'm 16. Wait, no, I'm 17. Right? I'm 17 years old, and I'm getting a flip phone, which is a very rare case. And I hope to see a future where that's not a rare case. It's just a generality. Okay, Brandon, I'll transfer back to you.
Well, I think we're actually going over to Devin here. So, Devin, can you kind of...
Real quick on the flip phones tangent.
Oh, yeah.
This is why I didn't want to give my thoughts.
No, it's good. I like your idea, actually.
In high school, I got stuck with a pink Motorola Razr. Not the smartphone Razr, the flip phone Razr from 2007.
Yeah, I had those. Shit, man.
Yeah.
They were the shit.
Not in 2012,
no, not
they
in
weren't.
2012, that's true. I mean, the world was ending.
Yeah.
Had a lot of stuff going on in 2012.
And all I had was me and my pink Razr. Yeah.
So your world was ending.
Yeah, pretty much. It wasn't even just like a fully pink Razr. Like, the back broke off of it, so I had to replace it with a part from another Razr. So the back was silver. It was just the most, like, ghetto-ass Razr.
Yeah.
I miss that phone sometimes, though.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it was a legend.
No, I do think Payne's onto something. I think, if I remember, I heard this somewhere. There's a lot of people, like, the big names in Silicon Valley that are, like, swearing off smartphones and going to the flip phones. Because there's just a lot of downside. It encompasses your life at a certain point.
See it.
Unless you're very careful about it. It encompasses your life. And it is a trend. It hasn't quite reached here yet, so Payne's a little bit of a pioneer in this area.
Yeah, but you can play Snake on a flip phone.
That's
and
true.
that also can encompass your life.
Snake and Tetris. Those are the...
Yeah. Maybe even, like, Space Invaders if you're lucky.
Well, if you're lucky.
Anyway.
Let's keep our dreams realistic.
Well, that is not a good framing.
I told you,
for
no
what
utopia.
I'm about to say, but... All right. So basically, you want kind of like just a top-down view of like ideal society.
It doesn't have to be top-down. Just more like it's more just the framework.
Okay, framework.
Because what you could control, I guess is what I should say.
But you do mean like the actual like literal framework, though, not like ideological framework.
Yeah, like how would it actually?
Okay, like practical.
Work. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So first and foremost, I do got to kind of preface this with like, while it's not utopian, this is like, I understand this is not something that happens overnight, and this is like more of something to work towards than like a let's burn everything down and then do this move. But essentially, it kind of, the like ideal, well, government's not really the right word, but the ideal system for me starts from the bottom up. because I think any system you have that starts from the top down has just inherent problems that will keep it from lasting. Whereas if you start from the bottom up, you do encounter problems. There are problems with that. But at the same time, it's kind of one of those things where everyone is involved in it and everybody has a stake in it. And if it all goes to hell, it goes to hell for everybody. So you kind of have that consideration. It also, I think, gives every person on some level a voice, because when you democratize basically everything, you have more people getting the representation that they want and need. As well as you don't have like weird cutoffs between like higher ups and the bottom half, because if those higher ups have come from like the group, like for instance in like a factory or a workplace, if the higher ups in that factory or workplace came from the workers, like they were a worker at one point as well, and have like they actually know how that job works, then there's not going to be this weird disconnect you have where like if someone's hired on over people but they've never actually done the job those people are doing, you kind of have this weird disconnect, and you have the people at the bottom who start to get understandably irritable with the people above them who don't know how their job actually works and are telling them how to do their job. And at the same time, you have the people at the top who got there because they were chosen by those workers. They're at the top, but they know how the job works, and they were put where they are specifically because they're good at arranging the job to work as efficiently as it possibly can. Now,
okay, so off a couple things.
Which, I mean, that was kind of specific, like a workplace type of deal.
Well, that's actually was going to be one of my critiques of, is that I whenever I listen to communists or socialists or anyone in those who tends to fall within those groups, they tend to always use the analogy of the factory, which is nowhere near as present as it was 100 years ago. I think it's an outdated...
I disagree. The factory still very much exists.
No, of course it does. It's just not nearly as large of a chunk of society as it is today. Right. So it seems... I'm not saying you're doing this. I'm saying I always hear the argument based upon the factory worker. Okay. I think in some instances that, okay, fine, I don't have a problem. People should be promoted because they know what they're doing. That's fine. But it's... And this brings me to my second argument, which is I don't think the people at the bottom rungs, towards the bottom of the hierarchy in any system, especially revolving around the workplace, are necessarily going to be happy with their bosses unless things are going well. And anytime things go bad, the person who's above them has to usually make tough decisions, and that usually impacts the workers. But the workers tend to only have to look at how it affects them. The boss has to look at how it affects both them, him/her, and the company as a whole. There is a conflict of vision. I'm not arguing that. It's more that I think that the conflict between those visions is inevitable to a certain point. And I don't think that giving more... that's not the right way to phrase that. I don't have a problem giving more powers to the workers necessarily. It would depend on exactly how it's done. It's more just, I don't think that them choosing who gets promoted, democratically, however, is going to make the tough decisions that are eventually going to come any more palatable to them.
I mean, it would depend on the person for sure, but I don't think it would make the decisions any more palatable, but I do think it would make them at least a little bit understandable, because when your boss is someone you know, and you can actually like understand, hey, they probably, they had to think about this, and it's not just someone who was placed above you, because that's going to breed resentment. When you have someone who is not from the group placed above the group, or hired on completely from outside, it's going to breed resentment if they start making decisions that are unpopular. Now, that's not to say that someone from the group who is democratically elected to their position isn't going to make unpopular decisions and isn't going to breed some kind of resentment. They very well could. But that's the thing, is that at least it's an understand. There's a communication there. Whereas when you place somebody above others from outside, there's really not. It alienates both groups, I feel like. As far as the conflict of interests and conflict of visions between the different levels, though, I think most of those problems would not be nearly as serious in a non-capitalist society. If you look at it from the point of view of a lot of the problems that you're referencing there would be things like competition, or we're having to cut wages to keep up with competition. If that's not a factor, then the problems you run into that would be unpopular are something as simple as things like disciplinary actions. People who aren't doing their job or are doing their job intentionally poorly.
Well, I think that leads to an even bigger problem, in my opinion, which is you seem to be advocating against competition, which I think is not a good idea. I think competition, it lowers the price for the consumer, and we are very much a consumer-based economy. The alternative to that would be the only alternative I could see would be I guess maybe a company based upon the worker, but in some ways that is what a consumer-based economy is. So, can you elaborate on on that?
Well, I will go ahead and throw it out there that ultimately the system I'm advocating for ends in a moneyless society. But in the interim period, the idea of a company being worker-based, I don't think, there are a couple exceptions, but I don't think that's at all what we have currently. I think we have a very much CEO-centric not economy as a whole, but as far as the way businesses are set up, it's very much a top-down.
In terms of what?
In terms of how businesses function.
You mean in terms of what they consider to be success? I don't know.
No, like actual operation.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
They generally operate top-down. There are a couple exceptions, which those are varying levels of worker-centric, but generally what you have, though, is you have a CEO who owns and runs the company, and then you have the people they have hired on that actually do most of the work, as far as logistics and marketing and things like that. Yeah. And then you have the worker below that, after you get through waves and waves and waves of managers.
Yeah.
What I'm advocating for is you start with the worker and build up from there. You have management, yes, but that management is elected. That management comes from the ranks, as it were.
Okay, so in that system, who's undertaking the risk to get a business moving, to get something started off the ground?
In a non-capitalist society, you don't have that.
Oh, okay, come on now, Devin. There's always risk. If there's no risk,
if there's no market, there's no market risk.
Oh, you're advocating for a marketless society at the same time.
Essentially, and this is one of the things that I'm still not entirely sure on. For essentials, absolutely. I'm not necessarily opposed to for luxury items and things like that. There not being a market, that's kind of iffy for me. I don't know, but as far as essentials, yes, I'm arguing for a marketless society.
What do you consider essentials?
Housing, food and water, healthcare.
That's it. I'm not trying to trap you.
As far as to survive, yeah.
Okay, I wasn't trying to trap you. That was just a question. I just need to know what you consider essentials. Okay, so
clothing, I guess, as well. But that.
Okay.
So it's some kind of clothing.
Okay. So one of the main problems I have with that is I don't see exactly. Okay, so in a stateless society, how would those essentials be distributed necessarily? If you're not advocating for the market, or if you're anti-market and at the same time anti-state, how are those essentials distributed?
Okay, so the last one I mentioned was clothing. So we'll, I guess, start with clothing. So you have the clothing factory. I know factory,
No,
but you have the clothing factory. They make the clothes. That is their contribution to the society they are in. That is what they are putting in, is making these clothes. They then distribute those clothes, and again, as far as the actual, like, literal, like, person-to-person level of how do you distribute something, I'm gonna be honest, I'm not great at logistics. I don't know how exactly you would do it physically.
I think that's a problem in a way because... Okay, so we talked about this a couple weeks ago for something completely unrelated to this, but it holds true. If I had to pick one sort of doctrine to live by that was purely secular, it would be do no harm. The old
right.
Hermetic, I can't remember the old
okay.
The systems we have in place today tend to work and at the same time are extremely complicated. I think messing with these logistical systems in a way that I cannot see being avoided by moving to your system is a very dangerous thing that could... I mean, look at the Holodomor. Look at. I mean, these systems were messed with, and they led to the deaths of millions. I think tampering with the system as complicated as we have today is extremely dangerous.
Well, I think allowing capitalism to continue unfettered will eventually cause greater harm. It's one of those things, and I've talked about this several times whenever we mention capitalism. It's not that I do have a lot of issues with how capitalism exists in our modern society. What I'm more worried about, though, is that I think in the future, capitalism is going to get very, very bad very, very quickly. Because it is not a system that is built to last. It is a system where somebody at the top ends up getting what they want, and then they want to hang on to it.
Well, of course, that's human nature. I don't think that's necessarily... You don't think that people strive towards the top of the hierarchy and want to stay there? Because that's essentially what you said.
I think people strive to survive. I think capitalism creates an idea of human nature that it then emphasizes and rewards. That's the thing. We have a society that, if that's human nature, and if that's your view of human nature, and if that is something bad, why is a society that rewards that good? Because capitalism does reward undercutting everyone around you to get what you want.
That's not necessarily true. It's the whole psychopathic. The argument I've heard a lot is the whole psychopath tends to do well in business. It's a myth. It's not true. Psychopaths have to move between hierarchies rapidly because people tend to find out what they're doing and don't want any part of it. The people at the top. The best analogy I've heard is the analogy of the gorilla. If you have the strongest gorilla, who's 1.5 times stronger than everybody else in the pack, if he's not cooperating with the rest of the gorillas, on a bad day, 2 gorillas 3/4 the size are going to tear him apart.
Well, this is the thing, though. That doesn't really work because in a capitalist society, if we're just rolling with the metaphor here, that gorilla would be able to sell off a little bit of his strength to hire other gorillas to protect him. So he wouldn't have anything to worry about.
Okay, maybe that holds. I'll give you that for now. But there's also the problem. You seem to think that people, once they get to that spot, they stay at that spot. The 1% is fluctuating. The people in the 1% today are not the same people who were in the 1% 5 years ago. People 5 years from now are not going to be the same people who are in the 1% today. There's a few. Now, I'm not going to argue. Right. There is a few that hang on. But a vast majority of those who are in the top positions do not stay there.
But they do not drop rapidly from grace either. They still stay generally in the top 10% at the very least. And the difference between the people in not just that 1%, but in the higher percentiles in general, is so much of an astronomical gap between the people in the middle and lower classes that it's... The positions of the people who are past a certain point are kind of irrelevant at that point. Yes, they're going back and forth between each other, but the people below them are just gradually getting further and further below them.
Okay, so what is that point? What is that point where once you get there, you're okay? Because that seems to be...
Just to make a safe bet?
A safe bet.
I would say if you're a billionaire, you can basically just rest on your laurels for probably the rest of your life and the rest of your children's lives,
Okay.
at the very least.
But those are a handful of people. The top 1% is, I believe it was 400,000 last I looked, a year. That's not that huge. It's a lot. I would love it. But it's not that big. It's not as big as people tend to shout, like, oh, 1%.
Well, I mean, you compare that to how much someone on minimum wage makes, though.
Okay.
And it is that big.
Okay, yeah, but they're doing completely different jobs.
But the question is, are they doing different enough jobs
Yes.
that's worth it in every case?
Yeah. In every case, that's not fair.
My
a majority,
thing is, like,
then yes.
I get the argument or the capitalist argument of these people are more important to society, so they should make more money.
Whoa, that's not the same. That's not the same at all.
like usually that's the argument given for like healthcare making more than like food service. That's okay. That like I get the argument at least there. What I'm getting at is, I think the dangers of venture capitalism and the borderline worship of entrepreneurship at this point is a little unrealistic in a lot of cases. A lot of these people are not putting themselves to the risk that we would like to think that they are.
Oh no, they're not anymore. But at one point they were. They get there somehow. I agree. I agree with you, and the point that once you get to a certain point, you're pretty much safe as long as you don't.
I want to comment on what you just said, because I think that is one of the most important things, or one of the things I feel the most strongly about with capitalism. Capitalism in its early stages is not a terrible system usually. When you have people who came to the U.S. and managed to make fucking Carnegie Steel and things like that, it's impressive. It's the poster child for capitalism, bringing somebody up who moved here with nothing in their pockets and became unreasonably rich. But over time, that happens less and less because you start to get an upper class that doesn't like new money coming into it. They want to keep the money where it is. And if somebody does come in, then they'll buy their company out. And yeah, they get a nice chunk of change for the time being, but it keeps the people on top right where they would like to be. That's why I say when capitalism reaches its end point, you basically just circle back around to feudalism.
I would disagree with that because you're talking about a voluntary transaction. I don't have to sell. That's a choice. I can choose to sell my property should I choose to.
That's the thing. If the question is, we will put you out of business or you will sell your company, it's not a voluntary transaction. If the idea is, you can sell us your property or we will bankrupt you and then buy your property from the bank, that's not a voluntary transaction. These are things that happen.
Yes, they are. I agree with that.
That's the thing is, I don't know necessarily that a free market has ever truly existed, but I don't think even if it did that it would stay free for very long.
Well, it depends on what you mean by free, because I tend to define free as free from government intervention. So I think we might have different definitions of free there, at least in terms of economics. That's how I view freedom.
Well, I would even disagree with that, because at some point it's a more roundabout way, but you do have government intervention happening on behalf of corporations.
Yes, and I think that's a problem with government. I think that's a
problem with both corporations and government. But
okay, I think I would agree with that. That's fine. My point is, without government being able to interfere in that way, corporations would have a lot harder time doing that.
Well, that's the other thing, though. While you do have that, you do also have some government intervention to prevent, monopoly busting, things like that.
I'm fine with that. I don't have a problem with busting if they're actually monopolies. I don't have a problem with that. I don't think Microsoft was a monopoly. I think I've said this before in the podcast. I don't think when they busted Microsoft, they were a monopoly. AT&T probably was. I'll give them that. I can't think of any more modern examples of monopoly busting off the top of my head. I can't think of any companies that deserve to be busted as a monopoly in the modern day. So those are the recent ones. But I agree. When Monopoly bumps up, it comes to existence. There we go. It should be put down. It should be broken up. I don't have a problem with that, as long as it is a true monopoly. I don't think that. Competing very strongly even against up and coming businesses is the act of monopoly. I don't
think it's the act of monopoly either. I think it's just what happens with established capitalism. Once you have when capital is the unit of power in a society, people who already have more of it, or corporations rather, that already have more of it, are able to deal with smaller corporations who might be competition to them much easier than those. Yes, those smaller companies could overcome them by having just a very excellent product and also being extraordinarily lucky and also being in the right place at the right time. But that's unlikely. It's very unlikely. And if, without serious blunders from the corporation with the upper hand there, 9 times out of 10, the smaller company is not going to come out on top.
Okay. I think one of the problems I'm having with this whole argument is that I'm failing to see where the involuntary transaction comes in, which is what I think really, in my opinion, the morality of it comes down to. I can't morally...
Okay. Something done under duress is not a free action. If you were put
you're
under...
not going to make as much money because I'm competing against you is not duress. That's not...
that's not what's being said either. It's you're not going to make any money because we are going to bankrupt your corporation. Or you can sell it.
I still don't consider that duress.
I don't understand how that's not duress, though. It very much is a threat. And when money is everything in a capitalist society, not making any of it is pretty much your ruin. So I think it's a very serious threat.
1 second, if we're still recording, the screen's a little messed up here. Give me 1 second. Okay, there we go. Okay. Duress, I think, on some level requires the threat of physical action. I think that is what it has to come down to. I don't think the whole idea of everything revolving around power is necessarily true. I think that's a wrong way to look at things.
I honestly don't see how that works. You can see the visible after effects of someone being bankrupted and know that it has actual physical consequences. You can make a threat without violence. You can starve a country to death, and that's roundabout violence. Just because you didn't go to war there doesn't mean threatening to starve them isn't a threat.
How are you starving them then?
Sanctions. You don't let any... If you can cut off money to a country.
Yes.
And if you do, and they can't supply food for themselves, they're going to die. But you didn't actually go in there and physically attack them, so that's not violence under the definition you were given, right?
If you were forcing other countries to if you were enforcing sanctions and you weren't well, I guess, are you talking about an embargo, or are you talking about purely just not giving them what you have, or not trading?
No, I'm talking about an embargo.
An embargo has a threat of violence in it. That's inherent to an embargo. I mean, if you were going to say I'm no longer going to supply you, I think depending on the situation, that's probably not the right way.
I'm not going to supply you, and I'm going to make sure through non-violent means, sure, then no one else is going to supply you.
Okay, see, I don't see that. I don't see that happening. I can't think of an instance of that actually happening. Because as things tend to work, we're a hegemon,
actually,
but
Cuba after the fall of the Soviet Union.
Post-Soviet Union.
Yes. Or, alternatively, for a hypothetical, North Korea without China.
See, I do think there is a... I don't think... that's a tough one. I will give you that. That is a tough one.
And that's not to defend either of those countries, but it is the case where the embargo... You can do serious damage with an embargo.
Yes, I do. No, I completely agree with that. That's not, I wasn't arguing the effectiveness of an embargo. I was saying... I do think that we were at war with communism. I do think that is true, and with the leaders of those nations. I do think that is probable cause for an embargo.
I'm not saying whether or not it was right or not to do that. I'm not arguing on a moral level. What I'm getting at is that it had physical consequences, even if physical violence was not used to achieve those goals, which goes back to when you bankrupt a company.
Well, wait.
Or a small business.
I'm not completely familiar with. I'm not at all familiar with the embargoes against North Korea and Cuba. But if we weren't enforcing the embargo through threat of violence, then anybody could trade with them at any point, correct? Should they choose to.
If you also threaten that they... Okay, let's go a real big roundabout hypothetical, since this takes place in the Cold War, and there's very obviously a threat of violence there. But it does not necessitate a threat of armed conflict. If the argument is, okay, America, you were trading with America before, you're not going to trade with America, America's going to make sure no one else trades with you. Now, could they do that through military means? Yes. Could they also do it through economic means by virtue of being an economic powerhouse? Also, yes. Now, you may have a few countries that are like, man, fuck America, that are going to try, and those would be met with violence. But
okay, there we go. So there is the threat of violence. That's what I'm getting at. That's
the thing. The starvation itself is still violence, even if it's not direct violence. That's the thing. The thing with capitalism, and the one thing I hear conservatives say a lot is, well, they're not actually hurting anybody. You can.
I disagree.
Levels of separation do not make something any less wrong, I don't think. Just because you are not actively, violently oppressing someone, I don't think that means they aren't being oppressed. Just because a business threatening a smaller business with bankruptcy is not putting a gun to their head doesn't mean that they are not going to basically make sure they lose their house. Like, there's still a threat there. And in a capitalist society, threatening someone's money is threatening them, because their money allows them to function in society. Without money in a capitalist society, you aren't really going anywhere.
Okay, so I don't necessarily disagree with the core of what you're saying. I just don't think I think I fail to see the problem. Whenever you start a business, you're undertaking risk. That's the point. That's why it's tough to start a business, because most businesses aren't profitable for what I think it's 2 years, if I remember correctly. You're not going to turn a profit for at least 2 years, and that's if you're successful, which most of the time you're not. There's a level of risk to starting a business, which comes with you might lose that business, and therefore all that money you put into that business. I don't see... If you're not going into it knowing that, then you shouldn't be opening a business.
I assume you... I would be willing to bet most people going into it have at least some idea. Now, they may not know the extremity of it, but I think most people going into starting a business know that there is some risk with starting a business. Now, they may be overly optimistic about it, but I'd be willing to say most at least know that there is some risk.
Okay, so if you're undertaking that risk voluntarily, and that risk comes to bite you in the ass, I fail to see
Well, that's the thing.
the immorality of it.
You
Should I not have
that
brought
risk.
immorality in?
No, that risk that risk is not the same as that risk was in the 1920s.
Oh yeah, I agree with that.
That risk is getting worse and worse and worse and worse because of precisely what I said. You have corporations that only are getting richer.
Yeah.
You're going to have more and more trouble starting a small business in that environment, and the market, as it were, becomes less and less free over time. Which is why I say eventually capitalism gets to a point where nobody's going to start a business because the risk associated with it will be so astronomically high that there isn't a point. And you're just going to have corporations that are capable of, that basically own a market. And at that point, there's not going to be a way to bust them up even with government intervention, because at that point they'll basically run the government as well, because that's the problem when you make capital the means of functioning in society, is someone with enough of it can do more or less whatever they want.
I can see how you're getting there. I don't think that's inherent to capitalism. I think it's a problem with where we're at now. I don't think it's as bad of a problem as you make it out to be, but it is a problem. I do agree that corporations have too much power. I completely agree with that. I'm by no means pro corporations throwing their weight around, especially in the government sphere. I think that's antithetical to republicanism. I don't think that's how it should operate. I just don't think that the problem is capital. I think the problem is a system of government in which the capital can actively affect it.
You're in a capitalist system. I'll phrase this as a question instead. Can you think of a form of government that would not be able to be manipulated by corporations in a capitalist system? Because even in the case of something
that would not be able to?
Yes.
No. Not eventually. No, I agree with that. It's something that has to be constantly fought. Just as I think every system has something that it has to be constantly fought against.
That's the thing, though.
I'm just saying I don't think it's necessarily an inherent... It's not as inherent, or it's not as inevitable. That's inevitable.
See,
as you make it out to be, I don't think.
I disagree. I think that it's the nature of the beast here. It's how the system is set up. You're not going, you can fight against it constantly, but at least even from just like what we've seen in the U.S., it's a losing battle.
It's not. I don't think. We are losing currently. I will agree with that. But again, the problem, as I see it, is a government that has so much reach that it can actually have an impact based upon what these corporations want them to be, how they want them to impact it.
The thing is, if the government has less reach, then the corporations just do it themselves.
No, not at all. There's a way around that. Well, what exactly do you mean by, actually, before I jump the gun, what exactly do you mean by
that? If you have a government that is large enough to actually interfere with corporations, then they can interfere with corporations. So the corporations basically take control of the government and then use the government to do what they want. If the government isn't strong enough to interfere at all, what's stopping the corporations?
I didn't say not. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying they should. I'm not libertarian, or at least I'm not.
You
I'm not
see
anarcho.
how these two ideas cancel.
No.
It's a paradox to me.
It's not to me. It's you seem to be.
Start say if you can draw me a picture here on how a way this works, but they seem to one cancels the other out as far as I can tell.
Well, no, because the problem. Okay, so for instance, nuclear power.
Okay.
Would be a very great thing in terms of the energy sector. It would be. It would. You agree with that?
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah, no, nuclear power is good.
Do you know why
I can take a couple guesses.
Regulation after regulation, to where before you're even opening the plant, I think you're at least. Oh man, I can't even. The number was so astronomically large. I can't remember. It was so much money just to even be able to start building the plant. It's this government regulation hurts small businesses. And for instance, minimum wage, which I know Mitchell's an advocate for. I'm not sure. It seems kind of antithetical for you to be pro minimum wage. That doesn't quite. That's a piece of the puzzle that really doesn't fit. Whenever I'm putting the puzzle of Devon together, I'm like, that does not make sense to me. How Devon would be for it.
It's an intermittent step for me.
Okay. That's the only way I could justify it, based upon how I understand you. That's the only way I could see.
It's one of those. The way I see it, it's one of those regulations you're talking about that is meant to force corporations to vaguely acknowledge humanity.
That's how it's portrayed, but it's wrong. It is wrong because you know who's advocating for this stuff? Walmart, and like these Walmart. There's some more. I think Amazon was. Apple, if I remember correctly. It's these giant corporations because they can afford to pay it. You know who can't afford to pay it? Small guy opening up a business, like some guy opening up a restaurant or a small town market. They can't afford to pay $15 an hour for their employees. It gives more power to corporations.
Right, but at the same time, if there was no minimum wage whatsoever, those corporations would not pay their workers what they even pay them now.
No, it's probably true, but goods wouldn't be nearly as costly either.
Well, the price of goods has increased. The cost of living has increased more than the minimum wage has since the 70s.
You're right. You're right, and there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. I don't think I don't want to get sidetracked on minimum wage because I don't think that's really what we're really talking about right now. But it's just that minimum wage is a band-aid that just makes the problem worse, in my opinion. I'll just get that. We'll talk. I'm sure we'll do a minimum wage podcast.
Okay.
Payne? Yeah. Well, we're 40 minutes in. Payne, you hardly said a word. Give me and Devon a quick break. Do some talking, Payne.
Okay.
Tell us what you think about what we've been saying.
Okay. You know, it's been good.
No. Talk. What do you? Okay. Who are you leaning more towards right now? You're the middle guy. You're supposed to be in between us.
I'd have to say right now, I'd lean more towards Brannan just because I'm more familiar with the ideas that he's presenting. Devon, his ideas are more foreign to me, but it's not like I have. Look, it's hailing outside, by the way.
Yeah, I should be able to reduce it in noise. It should be, or in post, it should be fine.
Anyway, so Devon's ideas are more foreign to me, I would say. So right now, I would lean more towards Brannan, but I think Devon has good points. I think Brannan kind of stops him in some sense, or like at least questions him pretty well. But yeah, that's just my input.
Okay. So just stick into the middle then.
Yes.
Devon has some good points, but Brannan has some good points too. We're just having a good old time. Okay, so and I apologize to the audience just in case I can't get the tail all the way cut out. It shouldn't be too bad. We should be loud enough that it we'll be okay. So where were we before minute? Or did you have anything else you want to say on minimum wage?
No, I think we can cover minimum wage somewhere else.
Okay, I think that'd be a good.
Yeah. Before that, I was asking how you could have a government that is simultaneously not strong enough to overreach corporations, but also able to regulate them enough that corporations don't just run wild. And you were bringing up nuclear power.
Well, okay. So, a big problem I have with government is the overstep of regulation. It like I said, it makes small businesses extremely tough to get off the ground, while benefiting the large businesses, the corporations who are able to pay to get those regulations done, because they have a shit ton of money. They're able to pay to do all that stuff because it costs money. Each regulation costs a business money. If you wanted to help small businesses, in my opinion, the best thing you could do would be basically cutting at least 90% of the red tape. There's definitely, I'm not completely anti-regulation. There's definitely some places where it's applicable, but
like the example you just gave, if without regulations, nuclear power is not a great source of power.
Well,
we have pretty good examples of why unregulated nuclear power is
Which again, I said that's why I said 90%. There's definitely 10% of regulations that are obvious. Most people, of course. The problem is it's the tiny. It's just all these. It's like it's usually a whole shit ton of these small regulations that just do nothing but hurt the small business. That actually don't really. It's stuff they were probably going to do anyway, but it costs to do it in the way the government wanted them to do. Because they have to do it a very specific way, or they're not going to be able to stay open.
The thing is, and in some cases I do agree, there are regulations that are basically just there to be red tape. It's which for some reason this idea has been getting traction even outside of this lately. I've heard people talking about this. If you pay that much, you must really want to do it.
Oh, that's
I don't like that.
I mean, fair enough, I guess it's true, but that's not really.
It has a very specific target.
I guess I'm not the target because it doesn't make any sense to me.
But a lot of regulations, though, are there for a reason, and they are because without those regulations, a lot of corporations would not follow them. It's the reason you have things like the EPA
you're targeting
exist.
You're specifically talking about corporations. I think we need to just say business. That way, we're including small business and big. Because I mean,
that's the thing. I thought I put this forward adequately, but if I didn't, the reason I'm arguing against corporations specifically is because I think corporations are the part of capitalism that prevents small businesses from existing. If you have zero regulation at all, small businesses will not be springing up at all because you will only have monopolies. That's what it comes down to. It's a system that basically, if you can eat the whole pie, you're going to eat the whole pie. And once you're capable of eating the whole pie, nobody's going to be able to fight you for your pie.
I completely agree, which is why I'm against monopolies. My point in saying that is, we're talking about regulation, which affects both, and in my opinion, has a bigger impact in terms of actual damages on small businesses. That's why I want to talk about business That's why I want to say business, because each regulation you're proposing is going to in some way be a cost on the small business owner. That's why I think it's important to keep that in mind, because I think there's a balance there. Some regulations are definitely deserve to exist, but I think we have to look at who we're affecting. We have to look at everybody we're affecting, not just people we want to affect. This is my whole thing of, again, do no harm. Capitalism is a very complex system. It does a lot of harm. That's not. But okay, but what I'm saying is, you move one piece of the puzzle to the wrong spot, the whole system could fall apart.
Right, but what I'm getting at is, if you allow the pieces to keep rolling as they are, unimpeded, they're eventually going to hit a point where everything collapses. That's the thing. Capitalism would burn the planet to the ground.
I think that's
for the sake of profit.
I think that's overstretching it. I do think they will do a shit ton. I think you're taking it just. I think
it's being way over dramatic with it. I agree.
Okay.
But
I don't think they go that far. I really don't.
If they had the means to get off the planet, yes, I absolutely do. But
maybe, but we're not. And when we get close to it, if we get close to it, then I'll completely agree with you. But we're not quite there yet, so let's.
Not quite, but
we're not.
I think there's some troubling things to look at, but.
But whenever it's in the scope of whenever we're actually seeing something being done towards it,
that's the thing.
Then I will gladly talk about that. But
you can't just wait until things are already about, because at that.
I didn't say wait till they're hitting. I said wait till we actually see the fucking fan, or have to shit one way or the other.
A lot of people who would argue the fan is visible at the very least. The rejections of those concerns are, in some cases, willful ignorance, or just outright distortion of evidence being put forward. Capitalism has its flaws. Even if someone has inherent issues, I don't know what capitalism has issues.
Yes.
I'm not targeting you with this.
I do think this.
But I've heard a lot of people say, well, that we got, but the thing is...
I do think that's true. I do think that is true.
But the thing is, how do we know that if we have not tested another system against it?
My problem is we have tested systems. I don't think you're going to put it forward in the same way, but it's the whole not true communism argument. We have multiple examples in which it has not gone well. Now, maybe you can point to a spot where, hey, they deviated where they shouldn't have deviated. I can point to those spots as well. The problem is we have tested this. It didn't work. Unless you're going to put forward a brand new way that's actually feasible to move towards that, even then I would disagree with you, but I would at least say you have a conversation there.
Well, that's the thing, though. If the main problem here, if the main risk is that if you move something, the system collapses and everything falls apart. But, okay, fair enough. It's a threat. It's a problem. If everything goes straight to hell, it's a big issue. That's one of the reasons I'm not necessarily a proponent of revolution. I think it should be something that's always on the table. I don't like the idea of it.
I completely agree. That's why I'm in favor of the Second Amendment. That's the point of it.
It's something that should be there, at least as an option, if necessary.
I just don't think we're anywhere near necessary. At least not for the same reasons. Go ahead.
But ideally, I don't think you go from point A to point B in just an explosion. You get there through gradual work at things. Which is why, like with the minimum wage thing, I mentioned it as an intermittent step. I don't expect everything I want to ever happen. And that might be for the best, because there are definitely people who know more than me. The issue is, I think looking at capitalism logically, you can't just leave it as it is.
I agree with that.
I think it sets itself up to cause a massive problem when it hits its later stages, because it's not a system that plans for the future, which is interesting because to be successful as a capitalist, you have to plan for the future. But the system itself doesn't really make any intention of planning for a future.
Well, I agree. I think I agree with that.
It's one of the reasons where any finite resource in a capitalist society is in danger, because capitalism does not plan for that to run out. Even if it very clearly will, the system makes no preparation for that, other than make a new market with a product that does the same thing, which is all well and good if there's a product that does the same thing.
Well, I don't think we've come necessarily across anything that doesn't. I would have to, maybe if I hear an example, mine might be jogged, but...
Well, I mean, you have like energy, and you have clean energy sources that are coming out, but at the same time, you have pre-existing very, very powerful corporations that are based around those previous energy sources. Now, logically, the thing that a lot of companies like this do is buy into the new energy source. Okay, that makes sense. That happens. You had tobacco companies that bought into vaping after a while. You had things like that. But you also have some who will just throw their weight around as much as possible to keep those new technologies from flourishing. And we've seen that.
But at the same time, they're fighting against an increase in regulation in the oil, especially if you're talking about oil and natural gas. There's been more and more taxes, regulations placed on them to the point where they have to struggle to be profitable. Chesapeake, who is in our general vicinity, has had to sell off multiple wells to smaller businesses because it costs so much, because they're so much bigger. I don't think energy is necessarily a good example for what you're proposing. I don't think it translates very well, because the whole thing about running out of oil is just not. It's just, I mean, we eventually, but it's not in the foreseeable future.
Well,
we have way more oil than people think we do.
Oh no, I'm very well aware we're not going to run out of it anytime soon, but we will eventually run out of it. And it's best to make plans for that as soon as you can. It's one of those things...
But not at the cost of the currently existing businesses, which is what we've been doing.
Well, that's the thing.
Recently.
You can keep on and keep on saying that until we do run out of oil.
Okay, so...
And people will keep on and keep on saying that until we do.
Okay, so what you do is you find a way for your new source of energy to be profitable. No one has done that yet. Tesla's the best example, and they're pretty much one of the very few.
Well, that's the thing. You also have those existing corporations who will do everything they can to prevent your new source of energy from being profitable.
It's a chicken and the egg thing, because once again, you have the government propping up. They're subsidizing these green industries, which are still falling under, and at the same time, they're burdening the oil industry. They have to. I don't think they threw the first punch.
That either.
It's not strictly that. That's a big part of it.
I mean, the current administration is pretty easy on fossil fuels, I think is fair to say.
Yes, and I think that's good, but that's a new development. We haven't seen exactly how that's going to pan out. Well, I'm talking about like specifically the Obama era was very tough on fracking, and that's what brought in the most amount. People like to point to Obama's job figures, how so many more jobs were created. Like something like 90% of those were fracking, which he was at the same time fighting against. The oil industry is, if we're talking, since we are on energy, it's very much backed into a corner at this point. I really do think it is.
It's still one of the most profitable industries in the world.
Again,
but
in the world maybe, but again, one of the biggest oil companies around here is.
But that is something you have to consider is looking at it from a larger scope. In the world, oil still is a very, very profitable industry. Mm-hmm. And you have to consider things from a larger scope as a capitalist as well, in that if the regulation is just bad in one country, that does not mean the industry is going to be bad.
Okay, but I don't want to rely on Saudi Arabia for oil.
That's what I'm getting at. Is the that's the other thing with regulation. Yes, it hurts corporations to some extent, but corporations can just outsource. And then they're functioning outside of those laws. And it's not a problem for them anymore. Until you have laws that target outsourced companies. But that's the thing. Corporations are going to find workaround after workaround after workaround to get around regulation because they can afford to find those workarounds. That's what I'm getting at, is the issue isn't necessarily the regulation. The issue is that corporations are very difficult to regulate, which is why you have a lot of regulations. Now, as for like how you actually deal with that, again, I don't know. I can't tell you how to just fix everything, but what I'm getting at is that I think corporations are more of the problem here than you're giving them credit for.
I do definitely think they're a problem. I think it's about 65, 35, 70, 30 in terms of government being the larger side of the problem. But more importantly, I think, back to the whole capitalism's end game, or the final stages, I don't think that's a problem with capitalism. I think that's the problem of the society that capitalism is embedded in.
I think capitalism creates the society. I don't think it's that capitalism is embedded in it. I think the society is based around capitalism.
That only works if they chose at some point to be encompassed by capitalism.
Well, that's the thing. They did. Because, like I said, capitalism in its early stages looks great. And it doesn't just look great. It actually is pretty great in its early stages. Because you do have the person who has nothing that can be an entrepreneur and actually do something. And become wildly wealthy. But after those early stages are done, that's not nearly as possible as it was previously. And you have... that's why I say that capitalism doesn't have an end game, is because capitalism starts off great, and then gradually, progressively gets worse and worse for everyone except for the people at the very top, and then eventually you hit a point where there's a breaking point, and either those corporations put down resistance, or those corporations everything falls into chaos, which is exactly the problem that you were getting at with what if you change something that breaks the system? You could hit that without changing anything eventually.
Okay, so what you just said is that it gets worse and worse for people at the bottom. That's demonstrably untrue. Things have only
because
gotten
of technology,
better, which is inherently tied to competition.
Except for all the developments in socialist countries. But
yes, they're very good at military developments. Which but there's certain things that
that's the thing.
The way it works is the military tends to get things off the ground. They tend to start it. What dramatically increases the rate at which it advances is the competition. I agree that there is a certain amount of state influence in getting something started.
It's not even the argument of state that I'm making here. I think capitalism puts competition as the only source of development when that is absolutely not the case.
Yes, things would develop without competition, I think, at a dramatically decreased rate.
I think maybe in general, yes, at a decreased rate, but I think the thing you would come more to see is that the developments made would be made more out of necessity, more towards necessity than towards profit, because profit and necessity are not always going to go the same way.
No, of course not.
I think the developments you make in a non-capitalist society are better for that society in general than the developments you make in a capitalist society. And I think you make developments regardless of your system or of competition or cooperation or however you want to go about it. Developments in technology are going to happen as we learn more regardless. Because people aren't just going to stop having ideas because they can't get rich off of them. That's the thing. Yes, there's a reward for coming up with all this stuff, but at the same time, there's also a reward for just sitting back and profiting off of it. It's not an entrepreneur's game anymore, is what I'm getting at here.
Okay, so would the smartphone be a necessity? Would the transistor be a necessity? I don't see how in the moment these are necessarily necessities. They're very much luxury items that became
communication
necessities.
is a necessity. The gradual development of communication technology is what leads to the smartphone. Mm-hmm. I think you still would end up with that. Now, would you end up with all the different kinds? Maybe not. But at the same time, I think you still get to that point eventually regardless. I don't think it's something where you can look at it and be like, capitalism did this. I don't think that's the case. I think we're giving capitalism credit for advents of technology and for people's own hard work that capitalism honestly didn't really do anything to cause. Yes, there's the competition, but for every invention that capitalism makes profitable, you also have good inventions that were probably thrown aside because their competitor was able to get them thrown aside. Competition does not always lead to the best result if the forces that are competing are not equal, and they never are in a capitalist society.
Okay, so with communications technology in particular, a lot of developments come out about 10 years after they're, I wouldn't say perfected, but after they have a working model.
Right.
And a lot of times that's the company doing it internally. Okay,
right.
That's for instance, AT&T specifically.
Specifically AT&T's R&D department. If we want to be super specific, go ahead. I'm sorry.
My point is, whenever you have a monopoly, which is in the end, it sounds like you're almost advocating for a monopoly of the people, in a way.
Actually, you know what? Yes.
Okay.
I'm okay, I think, with that terminology. I don't necessarily know how you mean, but
if AT&T had someone equally strong as them when they were coming up with these inventions, who was also putting them out, they would have been forced to therefore put those developments out to compete with the people who were simultaneously making these breakthroughs.
And maybe they wouldn't have been as developed at the time.
Okay.
And you would have had flaws and things like phones exploding. That's my thing. There are problems with competition as well. It's not just positives. Yes, they would have to have come out with it quicker. That does not necessarily mean that they would come out with them better, though.
No, but no. Like I said, they had a very good. I don't mean perfect. When I said I didn't mean perfect, I didn't mean that they were flawed. I mean they had 99.9% of it there, and they held on to it for 10 years because they had no reason to put it out. They got, again, I agree, there are problems with capitalism. They got more money by holding on to these competitions holding on to these developments because they had no one else out there to put out these developments. They had no one who was going to outcompete them.
Okay.
We would have had a lot of the stuff we saw. I think it was in the 90s that they were pretty much a monopoly. We would be probably fairly farther advanced nowadays, in terms of communication technology, if it weren't for them holding on to it for 10 years.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Okay, so what I'm saying is the lack of competition did hinder development.
Them holding on to that information or that invention is what hindered development, though. The thing is, what I'm advocating ultimately is that information being kept to themselves should not have ever happened in the first place. I'm for crowdsourcing everything, or open sourcing everything, but because it leads to transparency, and again, it leads to developments from everyone with access to it. And when everyone has access to it, you get developments much more regularly than a closed space where only this company, only this business is working on this, and nobody else knows about it, and there isn't any competition. Okay, well, if there is competition, then you have just this business and also this business over here. But if there's no competition in a grander scale, then you have everybody has access to this information. What can they do with it? I'm not advocating, that's what I'm getting at, is I'm not advocating for state capitalism. I'm not advocating for the Soviet Union, where you have one business in the country that does the thing, and that is all they do, and they keep it to themselves, and they do that. What I'm advocating is for everyone has access to this information and can contribute to it.
Okay, so a couple things. First of all, I don't think our audience would enjoy an argument about open source software from a computer science major, because I could go on about this for a long time. I am not a fan of it. Well, I'm not in general a fan of open source. It definitely has its place. But the main thing is, I think a lot of what you're talking about necessitates a moneyless society. In terms of what you're advocating for,
in the end state, yes.
Well, even if you're,
what I'm arguing for here is in state.
Okay, then yes. Okay,
yeah.
Okay, so explain. I don't necessarily need this super specifics, but I at least need enough to at least understand how the system would work without money. Because from what I've read and understand, it does not make sense to me. I don't think it actually could work in actual life.
Well, first and foremost, you can't look at it from a capitalist ideology. You have to try to break away from that.
My slate's blank.
Okay. Or you could even look at it somewhat from just the exchange portion of capitalism. If there is a society, okay, social contract theory. By being part of a society, I agree to that society's rules. Right?
Yes.
And that works great when you can leave society and then leave at a point where you can't.
Yeah. It has its flaws, I agree. But in general, yeah.
Okay, so I voluntarily join a society. And now I'm part of that society. Well, to be in that society, I am one of, again, you join a society, you follow its rules. So if the way the society works is I have to contribute to a society to be a part of it, which I don't think is an outlandish idea for anybody, then I have to find something in that, some way in that society to contribute. That's where work comes in. That's where jobs come in. That's where you're not working for a paycheck. You are working because that is your contribution to that society. That is your part. You pay your part, and you get to be a part of that society. And thus, you have access to the fruits of that society. You don't pay... God, there are people who can phrase this so much better, but you're not paying for food and water and housing. You have food and water and housing because those are things that the society produced. You are paying for those things by also doing a job in that society. It just cuts out the middleman, which is capital. Because in a capitalist society, it theoretically still functions the same way. I work, I'm paid for that job. The money I get allows me to take part in that society.
Money is the physical representation of the value of the value you have brought to that society. That is what money is.
That's the thing. I think in practice,
and real quick, that is not the same as saying it's the value of the human being. That's not exact. That's not at all what I'm saying. Just to throw that out there real quick. That's not.
I think in practice, you devalue that work in a capitalist society because you have the work being given. You have the work being given there, but the repayment doesn't always necessarily match up to the contribution to society. And I think that's one of the issues you reach with capitalism is you have to figure out how much everybody's contribution to society is worth.
Which is what the market is for.
Right, but you have contributions that, according to how much they make, they're contributing the most to society, but in actual practice, that's not the case. Now, again, on some level, I understand why in a capitalist society you would want, like, healthcare professionals to make more than food service. I get that. I get why that is. But the issue comes in when you have people whose actual contribution is essentially just owning a company.
Well, I think there's a lot more to it than that. I don't think it's ever as simple as... I shouldn't say ever. There are definitely some people who just make the money based upon what their company makes, which I don't necessarily think is wrong, but I think it is oftentimes a lot more complicated than that. They are doing... Being a CEO is an extremely stressful job.
Oh, I'm sure it is, but the thing is... I'm not saying it requires absolutely zero input. It absolutely does. And if you fuck up, there are consequences. The thing is, none of those consequences leave you without, like, any necessities. You still keep all of them if you fuck up. Whereas someone on minimum wage doesn't have that liberty. And that's what I'm getting at, is that discrepancy, that idea that, okay, I'm not saying a CEO doesn't do work, I'm saying their actual contribution to society isn't really any greater than anybody else's, and in some cases is actually quite less.
Well, I would necessarily disagree, because in a lot of times they are providing those jobs that those people are working.
Well, that's the thing. They're not providing jobs. Jobs would exist regardless of capitalism or socialism or whatever system or outside of a business. Work exists. Work's going to happen. And I think giving people the credit for a job existing is kind of disingenuous.
Okay, maybe I should be a little more specific then. They are providing those jobs in a much more comfortable and streamlined way than would exist without them existing.
How so?
Because capitalism allows specialization. It allows people to specialize in a single thing, no matter how menial or how complicated. And I'm not demeaning either one of those sides of the coin. I think that this might be actually. The problem is you're not arguing against the beginning stage of capitalism. So if I was going to go specifically with today, it would be that without... I'm having a hard time phrasing this. The upper levels of a business, all the executives and stuff, they do the work that keeps a business running in a way that is efficient. Now, it's not always efficient. I completely agree. A lot of times, on the smaller level, it's inefficient. I completely agree with that. But without them, the system in general tends to degrade over time. The system being the business that they are actually in.
But that's the thing. The executives aren't necessarily who I was talking about there. The people who are actually functionally running the company isn't always the same as the people who make money by owning the company. I could own a company and take no part in it and just basically collect my paycheck.
Okay, in the moment, yes, but you are most likely the one either you got that money somehow. Right, you got the money to get that business somehow. Yes. I do think that if you do work that increases the value of the market, I said value wrong earlier, I'm using it more accurately here. If you do work that increases the value of the market to such an extent that you're able to own a business without actually taking part in it, you've already done your job. I don't mind you sitting back and reaping the benefits.
I could do that without ever doing any job, period. If I was given that company.
Okay.
If I inherit a company, I didn't do anything to inherit it. I just inherited it.
So there's a problem in reality with that, which is I think it's second generation millionaires tend to fall out of that grouping very quickly. There are exceptions, but they tend to.
Well, that's not.
Okay, but my point is they don't necessarily retain what their predecessors gave to them. In fact it's usually the opposite. And usually, if they hold on to it's a little too ambiguous. I don't like arguing with this much ambiguity. So I'll stick with the simple fact that most second generation upper end, the upper end, tend to fall out of that category.
Yes, but that makes sense because they fall out of that category through their own spending.
Okay.
Or through, if they are actually expected to run the business, then mismanagement. That's
okay,
the thing.
So it seems to be a self-correcting problem then. So
Not
I don't necessarily
because there's very much an issue there where I could just not have, like, if you inherit something that you just make money off of by existing, and you just don't spend enough money to put yourself in bankruptcy, and just like practice even the most basic of spending habits, you should be fine. That's the thing is when you inherit all that money at once. I fully understand. If I inherited a company, I wouldn't know what to do with that much money. And at that point, it's either, well, I guess I just don't spend any of it, or I can spend money on everything. I get how that happens. What I'm getting at is that's not the case every time. And it's not a case of the system fixing that problem. It's a case of just people spending themselves into a hole.
Okay, but that...
And they're still not contributing to society.
Okay, so in that sense, it seems to be that you're arguing against inheritance, which I think is not...
To some extent, sure, but...
Okay, I will tell you right now that if I couldn't pass on what I earned in this life to my children, I would not work nearly as hard. I work for my children so they'll have a better life than I do. Look at first wave immigrants. That's why they were so successful.
That's not what I'm referring to. When I say that because what I'm arguing for is that everyone should have to take part in a society if they live in that society and contribute to that society. You leaving money for your children is fine. Leaving money for your children in general is fine. Leaving a corporation in the ownership of your child is fine even. But you still have to contribute to society. And I think that's the disconnect, is I think capitalism over time blurs that line to the point where you have people who don't.
He's working for his kids to where they can work for society, but they don't have to start from the bottom.
Right.
They can start from a comfortable position to where they know what's going on. They have the ability to rise up. They have the tools and the necessities and the education
Right.
to rise up from where they are, instead of starting from the bottom where it'd be very hard for them to actually rise in that society.
Yeah, no, and I'm not arguing against any of those things. In fact, that's exactly for is I think society would be much better if everyone had access to those things. That's the issue, is they don't. And when you don't have access to those things, you are much less likely to move up. I have no problem with wanting to give your children a better life or more opportunities. Actually, I think that's great. My thing is, I think the issue is that there are opportunities that lots and lots of people don't have, and the question that you really have to come down to is why? Because it comes across as just being, okay, well, it's unevenly distributed, and that's how capitalism works, and that's just the best system we got going.
That's not my answer at all. I do think that 99.9% of people have those opportunities. There was a study done. I can't remember. It was a very big study. I can't remember the name of it or who did it, so I apologize if you're the scientist listening to this podcast. But you basically had to do 3 things to succeed in America. I'll see if I can remember them. Graduate high school, find a stable job, don't have children out of wedlock. If you did these 3 things, or not even find a stable job, just be able to work is what it was. If I remember correctly, is that you're actually looking for if you can actually get a job. Now there are places I don't mind having that argument in terms of the jobs thing, but I do think 99.9% of people in America have the opportunity to do all 3 of those things.
I mean this in the politest way possible.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're looking at it from much too small of a scope. There are places in America that are wildly less advantaged than even where we are at currently.
I completely, yes.
And 99.9% is not even ballpark.
I disagree with that. See, the problem is you're saying that people should stay where they are if they have no opportunity. I'm saying you need to move. That's the thing. It takes money to move. It doesn't take as much as you would think.
I do know.
Okay, I know you moved, Devin. I know you did.
That's the thing. It does take a considerable amount of money because transportation is expensive.
Yeah, okay.
Housing in a new area is expensive.
Yes. I'm not saying it takes nothing.
That's the thing. That's the thing, though. It takes, if we're just rounding off to say minimum wage, it takes months and months and months and months and months worth of paychecks if you're doing it with absolutely nothing to go on. Luckily, I wasn't doing it with nothing to go on. Had I been, though, I wouldn't have been able to do it because I wouldn't have had the money to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, that's the thing. It's not just so simple as get up and move. The thing is, a lot of these people can't afford to just get up and move. And that's the other thing, is a lot of cases it's not just them. Most people have family members as well, and in some cases they may be the bread earner for that household. And yes, they can make more if they move somewhere else. But if they have family members, whether they be again children and like a wife and kids or whatever, husband and kids, or something like parents or siblings or younger siblings, something like that. You have people who are making the money for their household, and they can't just leave because people depend on them to make the little money that they do make where they're at. And yes, they would make more if they moved, but how they couldn't necessarily get that money to the people that they're providing for. It's not, that's the thing, not everybody is rootless. And in fact, I would say most people aren't.
I jumped the gun there. I'm not against, I think these cases are what charity is for. These people who are supporting multiple people basically by themselves. That's not the only reason charity exists. I'm not saying there aren't other circumstances, but that's a big one. That's probably the main reason, actually. But I think there's a couple things we need to look at there that I don't think are the fault of capitalism, which is why are there no jobs they're able to find in these areas?
I think that absolutely is a fault of capitalism.
Okay, well, if I'm picking a neighborhood to put a business in, I'm not going to put it in the neighborhood that's getting shot up
because
bi-weekly.
It's not profitable to do so.
Because I'm at the threat of getting robbed every other week.
Well, there's that too, but that's the thing.
I'm not going to put myself in a crime-ridden neighborhood. That's what I'm saying. If you look at a lot of the places you're talking about, at least the bigger scope of the generalization is crime-ridden areas of inner cities.
Well, that's the thing. You're putting the cart before the horse here. They didn't start out as crime-ridden areas. They are crime-ridden because they are poor. And that's the thing, and this is a problem with capitalism, is it's not just poor people tend to stay poor. Poor areas, even more so than poor people, tend to stay poor.
Yes.
Because if it's not profitable, it's not profitable. Now, the reasons for that could be, I don't want to get robbed, or the reasons for that are, I don't think my customers would come to this area. Regardless of the reasons, though, nothing's going to fix that area.
But no, that's not a capitalism problem. Let's look at Detroit. Let's look at Detroit. The auto industry was huge. People were able to find jobs there that would last them a lifetime. What happened was, it's not the New Deal. That was the nation. There was something in Detroit that was basically akin to the New. No, it was the unions. That's what did it. The trade unions in Detroit basically jacked up the cost of hiring workers to the point where it was just much more. It made a lot more sense to just move somewhere else. And then all the jobs left. It's not a problem with capitalism.
That, what you just described, is a problem with capitalism.
No, it's a problem of
not being willing to pay your workers their due is a problem. No.
You should. Oh, I wish I had the number. I wasn't ready for this. No, they were asking much more than their due. That was the thing.
What is their due, though? How do you determine that?
Okay. That's the question I was going to ask you earlier. I actually forgot about, which is who defines contribution to society.
Well, that's what I was getting at.
I'm saying if you can't afford to pay your employees what they're asking to be paid, that's not their due. Which they basically, I think it was like over, it was like, combined with benefits, if I remember correctly, it might be a little over, but I'm not much. It was close to $200,000 annually per employee at an auto manufacturing.
That's a lot of money. I understand
that's more than a lot of money. That's
astronomical
impossible. And that's what drove the business out of Detroit. Okay, if you want, I don't necessarily agree with the thesis that poverty leads to crime. It definitely elevates it. I won't argue with that, but I don't.
Poverty does lead to crime.
You're removing agency. You at all times have the ability to not.
That's the thing. I'm more likely to be motivated to commit a crime if I do not have access to basic needs. Okay, but those there are crimes that's not the case.
You're using basic needs very broadly here.
No, I'm talking food and water. And again,
that's welfare. They are getting food and water. They have smartphones. That's not basic needs. Not everyone has a smartphone. Not everybody has a smartphone, but a vast.
And I think
welfare
exists. I do think yes, welfare exists.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, I do think you are going off of an image of people on welfare that you have been given and not actually looking. No,
I've been on welfare. I have been on welfare. I understand. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that they do have access to basic needs. That's what I'm saying. So you can't make the basic. I don't think you can make the basic needs argument. That doesn't hold. I don't think.
Okay, basic needs we covered earlier. Did you disagree with any of the basic needs I put forward?
Not necessarily. The one thing it would depend on how you're getting these basic needs. That would be my main thing. I think there's better paths. Again, I want to help those real quick. I don't want to just throw these people away. I want to help them. I just don't think your way is the best way to do it. I think it actually does more harm than good. I want to help these people.
Well, that's the thing.
So I'm not saying throw these people away. Just real quick. That's my main point. Just because I disagree with 1.0 doesn't mean I'm saying they shouldn't get any help at all.
And I'm not trying to argue that that's what you're saying. Okay. I just wanted to make that clear that that's not what I'm trying to argue that you're saying either. I just think that there are issues present that are contributing to it that you're not seeing, I don't think. But what I'm getting at with the needs we put forward, one of them that I put forward was housing. You could break that down to shelter. Okay. I don't know how often you've been through the projects.
I've been through a couple times.
They're not pretty.
They're not. They are definitely not.
They are not what I would call adequate housing, even. Now, they are housing. In the strictest sense of the word, they are shelter.
Yes.
But you do have a lot of them that don't have heat working during the winter, don't have air working during summer, things like that.
Okay.
Upkeep is poor.
Well, now you're moving on past shelter to heating, air conditioning.
Shelter from the shelter.
You're adding
from
more
the,
things to basic needs. Is my problem.
Shelter from. I don't think that should be a problem, but
Well, I'm not saying it is, but my problem is it's something
shelter
I see a
from
lot.
the elements.
Well, it's something I see a lot is basic needs getting inflated slowly to the point of I've heard one of my professors say that smartphones are a basic need. No, they are not.
They're not a basic need. They do greatly contribute.
Yes, they're great, and I do think everybody should have one, or at least have access to one, maybe.
But
actually, I
access to
spoke
one-
too soon. I don't think that. Was
Access to one does greatly help your chances.
You should have some
job
way of
market.
connecting to the internet fairly easily.
Yeah.
So, but that's not a basic need.
No, but it.
So that's but
I understand why that scale slides. Of calling it a basic need is disingenuous. I agree. However, calling it something like a necessity to function to one's greatest potential in society, absolutely. That's the thing. A smartphone is going to help me get a job.
There's a lot of things that can help me function to my greatest potential that I do not.
Well, yeah, but
so I'm really being a stickler for definitions because I think in these particulars they're important. I want to fix you on exactly what you mean because I'm sorry. Okay. It seems to me that you're bouncing around a little bit in terms of in these terms like basic needs, best potential. That kind of hit me out.
Well, see, again, this is not to be rude, but we did have that argument about the paradox with enough government, but not enough government, where the definition was shaky there too. That's the thing is, I understand. Like, I will define the terms you want me to define all night, but the thing is, I'm not trying to just move these definitions around to like.
I know you're not. That's why I think whenever I finally get what you're saying, you'll stick to it. I just need to know. I need to know at least in general what you're saying, because that one term you said, functioning to your greatest potential, that could mean a lot of things.
Well, that's what I'm getting at as far as like smartphones go. Like, you're going to have a lot more ability to follow through with your potential with a smartphone than without.
I disagree.
In modern society.
Okay.
Access to the internet remotely.
We're going to have to let him talk. He never talks. I'm sorry, Devin.
All right. So, what we've progressed in,
and that's Payne
technology. So these are tools. I'm not gonna disagree.
It's a tool.
Smartphone is a tool. Great tool. It's a convenience.
Okay.
The alternative to these conveniences are do not make us suffer as much of a penalty as we imagine them to be. I drop my smartphone, I lose my immediate connection to the internet. Here's what I can do. I can walk to the public library that we have and go on the internet there.
Okay.
Not as much of a convenience. It might take me a walk, might take me some money with gas, but I can still get to it. Now, most of the time, I think people have an access to the internet like that. If I'm wrong, correct me. But
actually, I'm sorry, real quick. I think that actually is a very, very crucial to what I was saying. Is he really hit the nail on the head with convenience? I do not think the convenience necessitates a basic need, which is what I think it seems like you're getting at in some situations. I
do want to throw it out there. I've already said smartphones are not a basic need. And I don't.
It was mainly the thing with
I'm not trying to say smartphones are a basic need. I do think they help you. They help you to have. Okay, let me throw a hypothetical at you. Okay, yes, if there's a public library with access to the internet, I can go there. I cannot go there at all hours. Okay, got that already. I can't go there at all hours, probably, unless it's a 24-hour library, which would be really dope. I'm not going to say it, but I can't go there at all hours. So if I applied for a job and somebody gets back with me about that job through my email, and I don't have a smartphone, and I've been using the library to do so, but somebody else who also applied does have a smartphone and is able to reply instantly, they're probably going to get their interview first, and they may be hired on and before I ever have a chance to check my email. That's what I'm getting at. It's not a necessity, but yeah, it does greatly help your chances in a lot of aspects.
I see your point, but like I said, we suffer a penalty to dropping these conveniences, but not as much of a penalty as we think. I think maybe, sure, that is a case that could happen, but most of the time, if you drop your most convenient use of technology, like maybe your tablet, your smartphone, and you switch to like a public library if you need, or maybe your computer if you need access to the internet. It's like, sure, in that case, you might not be able to respond as quickly. But if your interviewer or your employer really goes off that who responds to me first, then I disagree with what that employer is doing.
And I don't think most employers would operate that way. I've known quite a few employers in my lifetime. Maybe I've been lucky with who I know. It's entirely possible, but I've never met one who would operate in that fashion. I have met one who will look at girls on Facebook to determine who he hires as a waitress. That's true.
Me and Brannan have met the same person. We both know what we're talking about.
Yes, but in terms of like who gets a hold of them first, unless they're really aching to fill that position ASAP,
And in some cases they are.
But I don't think that's necessarily most. And if your town is so short on hiring that they are literally looking to the first person who replies, that means you're probably in a seller's market at that point. You're probably going to have another opportunity come up if you're that short on if they're that short on employees in that area.
Well,
which I think
not necessarily. It could be a skilled position as well.
If you have, I'm never gonna get this pipe lit. I keep pushing the mic away and having to pull it back. If you have a skill, you are, especially today. It depends on the skill. If you have an actual marketable skill, which would be most skills that were considered skills 10 years ago, then you're gonna find someone to hire you. That's not really that big of a problem. Now, it might be a little tough. I've known some people who have.
That's not the argument though.
No,
that we're making here. The argument is you're not getting that job, and maybe that job pays more. The argument is the first person to get in contact with the employer has an advantage. Now, is it a massive advantage, or is it necessarily the be-all, end-all? Absolutely not, but it is an advantage.
How so? If you were an employer and someone responded to you first just because they have an iPhone, does that make it?
Well, they're going to be the first application I look at.
Right.
Well, no. I've been part of the hiring process multiple times. You've already looked at the applications. That if you're calling someone back, you've already looked at the applications. That's not necessarily.
That's the thing. True. If the application is put forward online, then that's what I'm saying. You saw their application.
Oh, I thought we were
first.
talking about callbacks, like emails.
No, but as well as callbacks, yes, you've already seen the applications, but you also have that person who is the first person you go to. Now, again, I'm not saying this is ideal hiring practice. Ideally, you go through all of your candidates and figure out which one you like the best and is best for the job. That may or may not be how it actually works. Things don't always work perfectly. What I'm getting at, and what I'm just trying to put forward here is it is an advantage. Like, there is a clear advantage to having constant access to the internet.
Oh, completely. I'm just saying it's not, and you agreed. It's not, well, actually, internet, you should have some way to access that. But in terms of it, again, convenience isn't a need. It's definitely an advantage. I would never argue that. Of course it is.
Yeah, no, and that's why I said smartphones aren't a basic need.
I thought you said R for a second.
No, they're not.
Argue it to what point, to what extent they are an advantage, though.
I mean, yeah, you could argue different points that they are an advantage, and you could argue the disadvantages and societal problems that constant access to technology has. And I think those are very valid and should be looked into. I don't disagree with them. I think in general technology is positive, but we're not.
Technology itself is a positive or negative. It's not. It's how we use it, in my opinion. And I agree with Payne to an extent. It's well, you guys, I don't know. I observe Shabbat. I observe the Sabbath, and after I stopped using my phone on that day, I probably use my phone half the time I used to during the week because I realized how good it is to just get off the phone. It's not the smartphone itself, it's how you use it. I use my smartphone to learn languages, to study for coding, programming, that kind of stuff, networking. If you use a smartphone as more than just a way to avoid contact with people and waste time, then the smartphone's great. I mean, I think you're going a little too far is what I'm saying. I don't think.
Well, okay, you mean with my downgrade to the flip phone?
Oh no, I mean, I don't see necessarily a problem with that. I just mean more like how you were representing it. I think if you use it correctly, it's a major advantage. If you use it correctly and incorrectly is kind of subjective. If you use it for your growth as a human being, it's extremely positive. If you use it as I said, to avoid contact with people on the bus, subway, in class, whatever, then or as a way to waste time, it's probably just going to hurt you.
No, I mean, I think there's ways you could even use it in a positive manner and it can hurt you, but that's just access to that much information all the time can wear on a person.
I agree. That's why, once again, like I said, I stopped looking at it, even though most of the time, even before that, I used it for positive means, even before I started observing the Sabbath.
I gotcha.
There is an overload. There is a threat of overloading your own brain.
Sure.
And it's extremely important to turn off, I think. So I would agree with that.
But back to where we were going. So the thing that I added on to basic needs that started this whole thing was heating and air, which I don't think is that outrageous to just include under housing.
No, I don't either. My problem is that it wasn't what you originally said, and I was afraid of the broadening. That's what I was afraid of.
That's the thing. I felt like it was something that was reasonably considered under housing. I maybe should have been more specific, but it just seemed like in the modern age, when you say housing, you include things like heating and air.
I probably would. It's just that's not how I took it when you first said it, and that made me worry that you were broadening your original definition. That's when I wasn't worried about what you said. It was more what I thought it might be leading to. Maybe I should have specified that.
I'm not trying to deceive you, Brannan.
Well, I didn't think you were. It's just I think it's natural. I think. Don't side. No, I don't want to side. Go ahead and go over you.
But what I'm getting at is, in these areas, you have things where, or you do have situations where the basic needs are not met, or are not met nearly as adequately as they are in other areas. When you have housing, but that housing doesn't have heating or air, it's not great. You're not. It's not the same as like having a comfy house that has nice heating and air where you can study and apply for jobs and use your phone and do all these things. It's like 7 degrees out and you're bundled up in the corner with a bunch of coats because it's just that cold in your house because nobody's come to fix the heat for the past 3 weeks. Alternatively, yes, you do have things like food stamps. You have people can get access to food. Okay, fine, sure. People can get access to food. If those come through when they're supposed to. Usually they do.
A vast majority of the time they do.
Most of the time they do even. Sometimes they don't. And if they don't,
it's a problem with the system, not a problem with...
Right, but that's the thing, is if it doesn't come through, it doesn't come through. It's not really a matter of this is a problem with the system or this is a problem with something else. It's if you don't have food, the last thing you're worried about is why you don't have food. You're more worried about the fact that you don't have food. And that's what I get at is if that is your, like, if you're having to lean on that to survive and then suddenly that's there, you're going to do what you have to do to survive. And that is why I say that poverty does lead to an increased crime rate. Now, not for all crime, obviously. White-collar crime does not happen in poverty-ridden areas, usually, except for maybe in some really extravagant case. But not all crime, but yes, I don't think it's a reach, and I don't think it's overcomplicating the issue to say that, or oversimplifying the issue to just say that poverty does lead to an increased crime rate. And I think the statistics will back me up on this.
No, it does. It does. That wasn't my argument necessarily. My argument, it seems more of a causal argument with you. I think it is. I don't think poverty causes crime. I think it, like I
think it encourages.
I don't think it encourages it. I think it more. Well, maybe encourage is the right word. Actually, now that I think about it, I was just going to say it more. Elevate is the word that keeps popping into my mind. I know that's not correct. It will. I'll just. What is the word I'm looking for?
It starts with
Multiplies it. It does make crime worse where it was already going to exist. Is what I would say it does. I don't think people who. I think that if this is very hard to put forward correctly without coming across as a terrible way to say it. I don't think hunger justifies theft. Okay, so we had to take a little break there. We're going to come back and we're going to continue this in a part 2, but for now we're just going to kind of I think bullshit as Payne phrased it. So Payne, what do you want to bullshit about? Let's hear it.
Alright, let's...
I have a bad feeling about this.
Right. Women.
Oh, yeah.
You know, who needs them? You know?
Well,
you know what I'm talking about?
We literally do.
Well, you know, for the human race, you know, needs to survive, you know, keep continuing creating more humans for the race to continue.
That's
Word.
basic biology. I can't disagree with that.
But as individuals in a society, do we need to reproduce with other women? No. But
fucking Pontius Pilate. What is truth? And then turns his back away before he gets the answer.
But what are we? But little assembled molecules of love. Are we not motivated by this gorgeous sex? Are we not drawn towards?
Are you turning
their
into
beauty?
Milton? Did you read Milton? Have you started
Yeah.
Paradise Lost?
Yeah.
I can tell.
I actually haven't, but hey.
That's the description of Eve, you know, it's that whole thing. But okay, so what exactly are you trying to say here?
I'm trying to
not
say
sure.
that if we were just to give up this this monomaniac fixation of love, then we'd be all right. But women, aren't they beautiful? What is more pleasing than the touch of a female? You know what I'm saying here?
Watermelon.
That's true.
Watermelons are.
I really like watermelon.
Which side are you on here? Payne.
If I may, Payne, I think
Please.
what you're getting at is sometimes it really do be like that.
Okay.
No, that's it.
But sometimes it don't.
I don't
Okay,
think it be like
fair.
it is.
Do you understand
But
what
it do.
See, the way I see it, alright, all art, all beauty, music, all those things are somewhat feminized in a certain way. So all
Okay.
beauty resides in the female sex. That is why artists are considered wimps to a football player.
I was up with you until the very last sentence. I actually agree very hard with what you originally said in terms of art for a long time has portrayed beauty. And, I mean, except for the Greeks, what's been more beautiful than a woman? But, no, I think that's somewhat true. Maybe? I'm not sure. Devin,
here's
any
what I'm
thought?
saying.
Oh.
Are
Yeah.
we?
No, let Devin
I mean,
Go ahead.
art's definitely been like.
There's that, but art also has had certain feminine, like, I don't know, it kind of has had a feminized place in society, whereas it's a much more toned down version of what Payne said, but there is the idea that if you are a guy who is an artist, then it's kind of seen as an effeminate position in certain cases.
Yeah.
Or, and I think less now,
And
I think it reached its peak in like the late '90s, early 2000s.
I agree.
I don't think it was like that. Actually, I would say maybe pre-1900s. I don't think it was like that at all.
Yeah,
I think it's a fairly new phenomenon that's dying out.
Yeah,
that's been dying out. And that's the podcast, everyone.
That's it.
But
sometimes it do be like that, and sometimes it don't, ladies and gentlemen.
You're fucking this chicken. I'm just holding its wings, Payne.
But all right, is the feminized idea of art too associated with the actual female presence?
How so?
Do we see the beauty in poetry and art and music and romanticize it as males to grant an alternative to ourselves from an actual...
Are you asking
female?
if art's replaced females in terms of beauty, or it has been as a tool for in terms of like a what's the word, alternative to females when it comes to beauty?
I think it's all one and the same thing.
Well, no, it was an either or.
I thought I was with you for a second. I thought we were going towards the muse, and I was kind of all right with it, and then I don't know where we went.
Yeah, that's kind of the same camp I'm in.
Are you saying that people, men in this case, use art to replace the beauty of a woman in their life?
Here's a little thing that I heard. It relates to Jungian psychology. When you see a female and you portray the anima on that female, and you fall in love with that romanticization, that's a crush, essentially, or in a sense,
Okay.
it's
infatuation.
Crush. Oh, what?
Infatuation.
Okay, sure, that'll work. And okay, so that portrayal, that representation of that person is, from what I've sensed, the same sort of feeling we get from poetry, from art, from music.
I think it's a poor substitute, but I guess the base feelings are kind of similar.
In some cases, I think that is exactly the feeling that I wouldn't say that art in general, because but I would say that there is art that is focused around portraying that feeling. Yeah,
I think for this conversation we need to exclude postmodern because it's kind of its own dragon, if you know what I mean. It's very much a one-off. Nothing's been like it before. But I think everything up to postmodern, I would probably agree with you.
I mean, the grotesque existed far before postmodernism.
Yes, but it wasn't what was generally agreed upon to be art. It wasn't as accepted.
Gothic architecture would like to argue with.
Gothic architecture is very much beautiful.
Oh, it is gorgeous, but gargoyles aren't.
But
they serve a purpose in being ugly that contributes to the overall
You're
aesthetic.
right. But the ugly itself isn't what is being portrayed as art.
But no, it is part of the art, though.
But it's not what is it. So I think postmodern, a lot of it revolves around the ugly is the art, and I don't think that's correct. I don't think that's the same necessarily as Gothic architecture.
Well, that's the thing. Ugly as the art is not really
It's a very base. I'm not saying that's all it is. I'm saying that's a very generalized view
I
of it.
do want to have a long and storied conversation with you about postmodernism.
I have a lot of books to read.
Because you do attribute a lot of things to postmodernism that come from
Postmodern philosophy, literature. I'm not as I really like postmodern literature. It's more the philosophy.
Art is where, because there are a lot of things with art where you attribute it to postmodernism that actually precede postmodernism back a bit. For instance, aestheticism, which is something associated with postmodernism, completely different.
I'm much more versed. The visual arts are probably my weakest in terms of the arts. So, fair enough. I could easily be wrong about that. But it's based. Okay, so but I don't think you can argue that the common view of postmodern art is what I just said.
To some
It
extent.
could. I'm not saying the common view is right by any
I
means.
would say the common view would be more that it just doesn't make sense.
I think it makes.
Or isn't meant to make sense or something.
Well, actually, that is my understanding of postmodern art. That is actually kind of what it is. It's the subversion of the idea that art is supposed to actually mean something.
Right, to some extent.
Okay, yeah, I don't claim to be an expert, but I don't. That's kind of what I'm saying. I think art is supposed to mean something.
Right.
I think that is inherent in art.
But what I was getting at before with the ugliness thing is, I don't think that's a postmodern phenomenon.
I'm not saying it's purely postmodern. I think
you have
more.
like gothic painters that like portray things that are. Not all paintings are going to be beautiful, and not all paintings are going to be good. You have even like portrayals of like in religious painting, you have portrayals of like demons and things that are very, very detailed and very, very horrifying. But because that's the emotion they're meant to put forward is fear and terror. So art can focus on other subjects than beauty without like.
No, I'm not saying. But there is a sort of even the greatly detailed demonic. I've seen a few of them. I can't. What is it, Solier or something? I think he does some of those. I could literally be pulling that name out of my ass. It sounds right in my head, but there is a sort of beauty in the painting at the same time, where the detail, I think what I'm getting at is I don't think a statue of a woman pissing on a sidewalk is art.
Well, okay, but that's not what I was talking about with what Payne was saying.
No, I know. Well, we've gotten sidebarred plenty.
I was just trying to say, like, I do think there's some art that portrays that, but I don't think all art portrays that.
I think one point we could make is that some art, music even, and stories can portray chaos and evil in, strangely, a very beautiful, capturing way. You can look at an archetypal figure that is just very chaotic, very disconcerted with the world, and very advocate for just outright evil, and you could still enjoy the sensation of learning or picturing this character.
It's the question of why is every single statue of Lucifer hot? We don't.
I love me some goat
why
tits.
does he need an 8-pack? Why?
I was thinking more of the goat tits. What popped
the
my
goat
head.
tits.
Yeah.
Mm.
That's Baphomet. I guess that's kind of different. Well, actually, what you just said there actually kind of made me realize what I was trying to say is there is a certain amount. I don't think you can appreciate good without at the same time understanding evil. And I think that's a lot of what those paintings you were talking about before, in terms of if it's the belief in one necessitates the belief in the other. I think it's important to understand, and it's important to understand both sides of the coin. So that's what I was trying to get at.
Okay.
Earlier. That was just to clarify.
Now, Payne, how does this tie back to this thing with women?
Yeah, I'm still confused about the whole woman
because
thing.
I want to know. I'm interested.
Because I do very much think that that man is dependent upon woman and vice versa. I think that's how we're meant to exist. In general, there are exceptions, all that. You know what? I'm going to say it now. I will, if I ever need to, I will just say, Podcast 5, look at it. I'm not going to keep making this point. I speak in generalizations. I'm not speaking about literally every instance. Podcast 5, 1 minute 58 seconds in. Look it up. Okay, sorry.
So women, like, they're pretty hot sometimes. Other times, maybe not. You know what I mean? Now, we can choose which roads to go down with
Payne,
these
real quick,
certain females.
you are a fucking wordsmith. I just wanted you to know.
And we can facilitate.
Oh, now he's trying. Way to go, Devin.
Sorry.
We can attempt. All right. Okay.
We're still here.
Give me a minute. We can attempt to change the outcome of these paths by taking different ones at the same time.
Okay.
When we
Multi-track
do
drifting.
that, it gets somewhat difficult to remember the aesthetic that women may bring to the table. But you also have to remember what we are bringing to the table. Now, usually we're the breadwinners, and that's okay.
All right.
Whenever
Okay.
we are the breadwinners, we have to remember that that's the path we went down. We
Word.
can't forget that.
Okay.
And the women can't forget that either.
Okay.
Although they went down a different path than what we went down, because we just crossed paths.
Okay. Gotcha.
When that happened, we crossed ideas,
Okay.
and that's the whole point of this podcast.
What a
Damn.
segue.
It
Way to bring
really
it full
do
circle.
be like that.
I think we should just keep re-uploading podcasts 1 through 5 as a constant loop. Ending with that and starting with the beginning.
Huh.
Aurora Boreas. Right there. The dragon eats its own tail. Okay, so I'm going to try to pull something out of that.
I remember the first time I ever drank Gatorade.
Oh god. Those videos.
And
I need to send you
I
those.
put the football milk in my veins. And you really need to see these videos. It's
They're
great.
pretty good. Pretty good. Okay, so are you saying that women and men are two different species?
No, we're all the same.
Okay.
But we're all different.
Yes.
Word.
And so we all go down different paths.
Okay.
Although,
Now talk to me more about the paths. The paths are where things got a little
Yeah, it kind of
different.
well, paths branch out.
Yeah. Okay.
And those create new paths.
Okay. So there's paths that come out of the original path, but everybody doesn't.
There
even
is no
know.
original path.
Holy shit.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. There's no
Okay.
original, but there are paths that
You just pulled it. That was good, Payne.
There-
You
there
can't
are
believe you
paths.
just pulled that out.
there are paths that branch out from an
Right.
existing path. Okay.
Right.
And they're wildly different, but also related maybe to the original path.
That original path is God.
All right. Look.
But see, God had to
or in the
choose a
words
path
of
too.
in the words of Aquinas, and therefore all people call this God.
Do they though?
Or something like that.
Well, what I'm really getting at here is we make decisions in life based off what we want.
Okay.
And when we do that, we create certain pathways to things that we want around us.
Yes.
Okay.
You see what you aim at.
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. If it's not, clarify. I'm just trying to.
Oh no, it's definitely what I'm saying. And what I'm also getting at is the people around us, when they create the paths that they want to aim at, or that they have aimed at through the force of going through a path, they are opened up to our paths. And that's when the intersection happens.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm
And-
going to try to make this work.
And that's...
So are you saying women and men the paths meet because the paths necessitate meeting. They rely on each other in a symbiotic relationship, and therefore the paths must converge because they're both aiming towards the same general goal.
Yes.
Is it really? Because the look on your face said that is not at all what you meant.
Well, yeah, it is. It's deeper.
Okay.
But that's essentially that's a good
But what is from what I'm getting, that's the case with just all people in general. So what is it specifically about men and women that you're focusing on here?
Men and women and
The tone differences in those two.
Okay.
Men and women
aim their paths in different ways.
Okay.
But these different ways somewhat play off each other. And when this happens,
I feel like I'm getting to talk right now. And then the stork brings the baby 9 months later, right?
but when this happens, there is an interchange of ideas of why they went down these paths. And when that happens, that's when the new paths branch out. That's how relationships end. That's how relationships get better. It's all about what's the truth and what is not the truth. You know what I'm saying down here?
Okay, I think that last sentence that
That's
you
how
just
they-
said
what do you mean
could
that's how they-
apply to basically everything.
That's my whole point.
Is what it comes down to is what is the truth and what is not the truth.
It's about finding your inner path.
Okay, Buddha.
But is that path predetermined, or do you make that?
Well, define predetermined.
Does that path exist beforehand, or is that the path that is destined?
It depends
for you,
if you
or do you create that path?
you
So-
can create the pre-existing path.